I've been through probably 1,500 transitions in my lifetime. The very second that he says that he's going to retire, that second, in a nanosecond, right? The staff thinks just like this. Oh my God, he's selling the office. I have to find another job. I'm going to go bankrupt.
The staff transition, that's a very delicate area, right? So when should we tell folks about the transition?
You have to make sure that...
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Office Hours for Practice Owners. I'm your host, Justin, with Marti Law Group, and I'm very excited today to welcome our guest, who I'll introduce in a second here. But I realize that we spend a ton of time in our world and on our show talking about sell side and selling and brokerage and valuation and DSOs. And we have a really large client base, actually a listener base, who are younger folks coming out of residency, whether it's in dental or medicine as a whole, who want to hang a shingle or buy a practice and kind of have that entrepreneurial bug. So there's truly, in my opinion, no better expert in this very niche area than Kathy Ells with Next Step Dental Consulting. Kathy has a wealth of knowledge that she can share coming out of dental banking, dental lending. I mean, she's seen it all from buy side, sell side. She's an OG in the industry. Without dating her, she knows it all and knows everybody. So, Kathy, thank you for the time. I'm very grateful. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure being here today.
Awesome. So to kind of kick us off, I'd love to learn more. You use this term buyer's advocate, right? Or kind of an owner's advocate, really. So if you can take us back to kind of early, career, Kathy, and as you're in lending on the dentist side, did you identify a gap and you realize there's really a need here for folks to be able to have an advocate as they're looking to buy or even start a practice?
Yeah, so I've been around for a while, so just I will give you a couple dates. 1990 to 1997, I was with a large CPA firm. I managed with about 200 dental practices. Then from there, I went to working for a little leasing company called Matsko, which eventually turned into Wells Fargo. I left there in 2012, went to Citizens Bank for a little while, worked in their side, getting the dental division kind of up and going. Then I went to TD Bank and was there for a little while. Then I went to Provide. And after that, I decided I was going to retire because that's what I was going to do, right? So I had been in the industry about 35 years, and I said, now's the time. And it's kind of a funny story because once I got into just being, 35 years in the industry and then deciding, okay, I'm just going to go retire. I made the age-old mistake, okay, which I had been lecturing for the 35 years. Always know what you're doing next, right? And so I just thought I was just going to go retire. Well, that didn't work out, because I started to take one only clients. I'm only going to work on one person. I'm only going to work on one patient. I'm only going to work on one. And then what ended up happening was I ended up having, 35 ones. And I then figured out, well, I guess this isn't working. So when I talk to sellers, I do talk to them and I say, look at, what is your next step, right? So why are you doing this? What is your next step? So not only from a financial side, but from an emotional side where, you really want to make sure that you're heading in whatever direction you want to head in. You have the next step. On Monday when I usually go to work, instead of going to work, I'm going to go to someplace else. I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to go ride my bike across the country. Whatever it is that you're going to go do, right? Make sure you have a plan to do that. Now, that's important because if you're on the buyer side, and on the buyer side, Dr. Seller says, hey, I want to stick around. I want to stick around because I have no place else to go on Monday. So I'm just going to go to work and I got all this money. So I guess I'll just go to work and just hang around with the staff. They need me, right? They need me there. So, I started to think about that and actually dive a little bit deeper. I had always been in my career an advocate for somebody, doing something for somebody from day one, right? If I wasn't your accountant, your tax advisor, I was doing something else, right? So I had always been doing that. So when I decided to retire and then I decided to come back as a buyer's advocate, I came back because I really felt like the industry really needed to, I took a couple months off and I thought about it and I said, the industry really needs to have an advocate for them. And whether it's a buyer or a seller, primarily I work with the buyers. And, in the progression of like my career has always been around advocacy. And that is what, I decided to go into after
right now, post retirement for your second act. So, I mean, did a lot of the work you were doing in lending though kind of lead up to that? Like, were you seeing buyers making the same, mistakes or just like a lack of preparedness? And you were like, okay, someone's got to really advocate truly for these folks so they know what they're doing.
Yeah. So, it's developing, right? So the role of the buyer advocate is really developing. And as I'm getting more and shaping, that mold a little bit more each day, I've got some really good material that you can go back to and look at, right? So one of the primary responsibilities of a buyer's advocate is really 4 pieces, okay, in a dental office. So you have your financial review, right, which is something that the accountants do, and sometimes brokers do it, where you have a tax return and you look at the add backs and discretionary add backs, right? You come up with a new net cash flow to the buyer. It's easy, right? You take the tax return, you plug in the numbers, you get X, right? So that's the first part, is understanding the financial piece. The second part is I like to say, the operations of the practice, which usually is somebody different. And this is where the buyer's advocate is coming in, okay? Because the buyer's advocate should help you with the operational piece. So they should be able to go in there, hold the reports, and explain to you what that practice looks like. All right. So is there opportunity? Are there any red flags? How do you read the reports? Like, I like to spend time with my buyers and say, and I'm going to pick on accounts receivable report. This is an accounts receivable report. This is what your accounts receivable report looks like. These are the KPIs associated with the accounts receivable report. And this is what you can do to improve on those percentages in that accounts receivable report, right? So not only am I running the financial piece, I'm also running the operational piece. The third piece is clinical, right? So for instance, I always ask for a depreciation schedule. I ask for the depreciation schedule because it kind of gives us a pretty good idea of what is in that office. Now, I'm not clinically trained at all, okay? But I can give you a list and I can ask you to go find all of the stuff that's on the list, or no, it's not there, whatever. So maybe we got to look somewhere else. But if we look at the depreciation reports, and the depreciation reports say that you have 10 chairs, we should be able to walk through that office and count 10 chairs. Okay. But there are other things that, I can look at a depreciation report and look at the computers, and like the computers are like dated 2006. Well, you know what? I really don't think that the computer system is working since 2006. And I even think that, certain programs that are out there made you update by 2010, 2018, whatever, right? To update security features, whatever the dates are. So I know that there's a lot of obsolete stuff, and that's okay, right? I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. That's just something that we just have to take off and say, we really do know that the computer system from 2006 doesn't exist anymore. Let's just clean it up, get it off, right? So that's okay. But, we also are looking at the results of the SPOR tests. We're looking at, we're looking to make sure that the sterilization areas are set up the way that that the licenses are, displayed where they're supposed to be displayed. We're looking at employees to make sure that you have, the rules and regulations. I mean, I'm talking to you, an attorney, right? So these are all the things you're telling your clients. Make sure this stuff is on the wall. Make sure this stuff is, displayed where it's supposed to be displayed according to the law. So that's the operational piece, right? So you want to know who's doing what. You want to know the reports that you're running, what that means. And you want to know on the clinical side, everything is there that you think is there. And then I know with all your legal, the fourth piece is the legal piece, which you guys do a great job. I love your due diligence checklist. I mean, it's great, right? Because it gives us a good idea. I mean, I usually go in initially, I'll run lean searches, I'll make sure licenses are clear. I'll do some different things. I'll ask the buyer to like gather some stuff up. Maybe if you're in Massachusetts, look at the last time the Massachusetts water resource people were in there, stuff like that, right? So I'll do kind of high level, but your checklist is a great checklist, right?
Thank you. I don't know if the other attorneys always think that on the other side, they have to get us all that stuff, but we want our buyers to be protected. So 100%, we have a pretty robust list that we go through, as well as, like you said, the lien and litigation and, what skeletons are in the closet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that doesn't mean it's a deal kill. It just means that, you moving forward, you're going to change it to be whatever it should be. Right. So, and that's all that it means. I mean, I like, because I've been around for so long, as far as working with so many doctors, I've seen a lot of doctors, not complete the process, the transition process, because they find something, or they have an accountant that, didn't like the numbers as much as the broker did, or whatever it might be. My feeling is, these doctors, they look for a long, long, long time. So when you finally find something, let's find a way to make it work. Let's not find a way to kill the deal, right? Because if you kill the deal, nobody's going to be happy in the end. Everybody's going to waste a whole bunch of money, and, and it's going to be disappointing to everybody. So that's not the goal and the intent. The intent is to get that thing closed, right? Unless there are blaring red flags, that you need to address.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's such an opportunity too, right? Like you said, unless there's some glaring, fraud, right? Or something just super egregious. Like if the marketing's pretty poor, the systems are kind of outdated, like that could actually be a huge opportunity for the buyer who's, younger, savvy, to come in and immediately make an impact.
It's funny. I used to say to people, I'm going to tell you some disappointing news. And they say, well, what are you going to say? And I said, well, I can pretty much tell you what your life's going to look like in the next 5 minutes. And I said, look, this is what happens. You buy the practice, you get into the practice, you work there for 6 months, you figure out you don't like some of your equipment, you update your equipment. After you update your equipment, after 6 months or a year, whatever, the hygienist starts to complain because they don't have their stuff updated. So then you go and you update their stuff. And now you're at probably 3.5, 4 years or whatever. Now you start to think about, well, you know what? My practice is doing really well. I doubled my revenues, so, do I want to stay here? Do I want to stay? Do I want to go? Do I want to add space? Like, what does the next 10 or 20 years going to look like for me, right? And you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to expand. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. So a lot of the bank loans, and we should talk about the lending a little bit. A lot of the bank loans, I like to say, are kind of short-term loans, right? Like within 5 years, you're going to be addressing that loan. So I always tell people, and all my clients, once you get your close on your loan, the very first thing you should do is send me a copy of the signed loan documents. I said, because you're going to need to see them in 5 years from now. I said, the banks are great. They'll send you a copy of the documents, but they're not signed, right? You want the signed version, because once they hit the go key and it goes into the bank land, okay, you want to make sure that, they're not as easy to get anymore. So get them right then and there. Get them. And then, like, you guys do a great job. You put together the legal document and the legal binders that have all of the legal stuff in there. And it's funny, like, when I talk to people about the legal side, right? And they say, well, why do I have to pay the attorney so much money? I'm like, because they're producing like 15 or 20 documents, right? So they're complicated. The documents are complicated, and they have to produce all this stuff. So, so that's one of the things with the advocate side is that I set very, clear expectations. This is this person's role. This is what they're going to do for you. Okay. And this is how you're going to use it, implement it, whatever. Okay. In your business for the next, because you're paying $1 million for it or whatever, you should know what to do.
Are there, and this is a bit of a loaded question, right? But is it the sooner the better that they get started? So, I mean, should they be thinking 12 months, 24 months, 36 months out? Because we've all seen the guys and gals who, wait till the last minute. Now they want to buy. We're scurrying around to try and get pieces of information and, tax returns and all the things. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they need it all. They need to know today the practice they want to buy in 3 years, but even for themselves, right? Like, what should they be doing to get ready a couple of years in advance?
Yeah, so I like to think as in 3 buckets, actually, right? So the first buyer comes and says, just out of school, 6 months, I want to own my own practice. I heard this practice is up for sale. I'm going to go buy it. And they go and they race into the seller's office and they say something like, well, your equipment's old and this is going on and that's going on. And I don't know about your staff and everything that there is to know about, getting and securing a loan and moving forward. Right. And the broker turns around and says, yep, no, you're out. And you walk away and you have no idea what just happened. No idea. You don't know why the broker's not looking at you. You don't know why the seller's not looking at you. That's it. It's done. Then you kind of go away, you think about it a little bit, then another opportunity comes up and you go back at a second pass, right? And this time you say, well, maybe I won't say so much to the seller. Maybe I'll just kind of observe and, kind of look around and, and you're like, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to put an offer in on this practice. I'm only going to pay 70% of revenue. And the broker, bang, goes away, right? And you're like, what happened to the broker? What happened to the seller? Right? Everybody's gone, right? And you find yourself in the same position. And then you get smart, right? And now you go in for the third time. And the third time you kind of go into the practice and you're like, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know how bad I want this practice. I'm going to put my best and final offer up right from the beginning. I'm not playing games, okay? And I am going to be completely prepared for this. And so I coach my doctors when they go into a practice. You go into a practice, this is what you're doing. This is what you can expect. I have them pre-approved in some cases, but I have a sheet that I work with. Basically, what's your credit card debts look like? What's your mortgage looks like? What do your student loans look like? What's your credit score? And you don't have any major red flags here, right? You haven't filed bankruptcy. You're right. No major roadblocks, right? So if you answer no major roadblocks, this is my stuff. What the banks look for is they look for about 10% liquidity, right? So if you have 10% liquidity and your credit cards are under control, you're paying them off at the end of each month, whatever, you have a regular car loan, your mortgage is under $7,500 a month, right? And your student loans are okay. Most doctors find themselves buying practices when they're probably around 400,000. Okay. When those student loans hit about 400,000, they find themselves kind of buying practices. If you can answer all those questions, I can tell you that the lenders will give you a pre-approval. Okay. Based on the cash flow of the practice. Now, as a buyer's advocate, you have to tie everything together, right? So you have to make sure that, the numbers make sense, the bank is going to approve it, that there's no major red flags with the attorneys, that everything is going to kind of come together and, you're going to get to the LOI, right? The letter of interest. If you can get to the letter of interest, then you pretty much have a deal, right? So some brokers will have you sign an LOI before you even see the place, right? So that's up to you, but it does set precedence. Even though it's not a binding, most of the items in the agreement are not a binding part of the, but it does set precedence. you said you were going to pay X amount of money. You were going to close at X amount of time. These are going to be what the allocations are going to look like. So you set that precedence. Once you set that precedence in the LOI, it's kind of hard to go back and change after.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we get folks too, right? They'll sign the LOI with the broker or with their CPA. Folks have looked at it, but then they come to us and they're like, I want to get another million, right, as a seller, or I want to pay, a million less, and I don't like this. And I'm like, well, and it's non-binding, right? The LOI sign is non-binding, and like you just hit on the head. It is, but like it really to go back and you got to renegotiate the deal. It's not a good look. It's not a good way to start. It's not going to set us up for success on the long run. So I could not agree with you more that like you've got to know what you're signing before you put pen to paper.
Yeah. And I think, I think really with the buyers, it's really just getting them to understand what they can ask for and what they really can't ask for, because you don't want to go and kill the deal. So, so I kind of, the one of the other things that I do is I like to look at the value of the office, not just the cash flow, but the value of the practice, right? And if you're a specialist, right? Say you're a specialist, you want to look at the referral sources, right? How many referral sources? What are the amounts? Is any one referral source over 20%? Is it likely that they're going to go ahead and stay with the practice if you leave, or if the seller is staying, right, for that transitional period. So those things are all like very important. And then, as you guys are working on that asset purchase agreement, we have the LOI signed, you guys are working on the asset purchase agreement and the lease. I'm busy working with my client on all the other things, right? So what's the name of your company going to be? Can we get marketing websites for it? What are the colors that you're thinking? What's the signage look like? Are we going to be able to put a sign out there? Maybe we want to keep the same sign out there for a little while. But if you're a startup, you need to put a sign out there. Looking at, transitioning the employees, right? How are we going to transition the employees? When are we going to tell them? How are we going to tell them? How is the payroll going to happen in the first week, right? I mean, you've worked so hard to get to this point with the LOI and the APA agreement and the red lines and all the other stuff that you think that, okay, I'm over this thing. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to pay these people, right?
Operate this place.
I got to operate this place now. Somebody has to pay them. Somebody has to pay the bills. Like, how do I do that? And I laugh a lot when I lecture at the schools, because I say, how do you pay your bills? And I distinctively remember this one kid, this one doctor, and he says to me, he says, well, I'll just pay it on my phone. I guess you could, but the thing is okay, so what are all the processes that you have to have in place to make a payroll? What are the processes you have to have in place to do your just everyday operational stuff? Like, who orders the supplies? Who writes the checks? Does the office manager, and you get along, will the office manager continue on with the practice? Sometimes, the office manager joined you at the same time that you bought the practice and was with, 30 faithful years, and now they're like, well, if you're leaving, I'm leaving, then there's a lot of stuff after that you have to deal with. And I kind of tell everybody, like, I give you a task list. When you work with me, I give you a task list and I tell you, this is what you need to do. We'll talk once a week, whatever, or maybe sometimes more, but these are all the things that you have to do. With Justin, you got to do 1, 2, 3. With your CPA, you got to do 1, 2, 3. With your equipment guy, you got to do 1, 2, 3, right? So, and I don't tell you everything at once, because you'd just be like, forget it.
I mean, I think about when we had our group, our DSO previously, and we would buy a practice or even a de novo we'd open. And it was like you said, you go through legal, like I glance at the revenue, I know we're good here. And then like you close and the staff's looking at you, right? And it's like, well, are we double booking this doctor? Or are we taking over the shine? And I was like, I don't know. What have you been doing? And so I realized after doing it for so long, I learned how to do these things, but I would have killed to have had a buyer's advocate. And now I see it in our clients where we're working on the deal, our heads down, we're in the legal silo. And, I'm not even talking to them about ordering and about, credentialing and these things. And then they close and they're like, all right, how do I, now what? And so that's why you've been a blessing, frankly, because we have a mutual client now that we talked a little bit about, here's some lender names and here's some introductions, but really that was it, and I wasn't giving him any guidance on operationally practical things to think about. And I mean, you hit on the head, what do the referral sources look like? What are the, what's the equipment situation? All of it that, he just, I think, is on such a much better path now because of the support, that the buyer's advocate can bring.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if that practice is, if you're bringing in additional skills into that practice, how does the front desk bill? How do they bill the insurance company? What codes are they using? What do they need to attach to the, to the EOB, to the information that they're sending into the insurance companies, right? Or the other way around, where, if you need additional skills in that practice, when are you going to do it? How are you going to schedule yourself and your time out? Is the seller going to help you and fill in that time during that period of time that you might be out of the office? Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, right? And then when you come on, how long does it usually take you to do that procedure? Does it take you longer to do that procedure? So you have to book that chair out longer. So somebody has to communicate that to the front desk so that they know that a procedure that, Dr. Seller would only take an hour to do, well, it might take you 2 hours to do it or whatever it might be, right? But I mean, it's a clerical piece that they have to make sure that they're, booking it the right way for the doctor, for the doctor that's doing the procedure. So credentialing that, I mean, I didn't even say credentialing. Yes, credentialing is always a big thing, right? So when you're looking at credentialing, you want to first understand, and what I do is I run your top 20 codes, and then I do an analysis on that. That way I understand, okay, this insurance company gave you, submitted X amount of money, and, this was what the write-off is by accepting that insurance and explaining that whole piece of it. And then to actually go on and actually do the credentialing, right? Some people just need to be enrolled. Some people enrolled in that location. Some people need to be credentialed, right? So we know that there's a new tax ID number. We know that, right? So, we have to, different insurance companies do it different ways. But in the end, they're all going to ask for the same information. It's just when you're giving it to them. So,
yeah. I mean, there's so many things you're doing beforehand to help them prepare. I assume a big part of your role is also on an ongoing basis where they've bought it, their things are in the works, but someone's still got to manage it, right? And if they're clinical and they're in the chair, especially as a new practice owner, there's a lot to juggle. So is a big piece of it continuing that relationship with you or with the advocate to help them continue to function and basically get coached?
Yeah, so pretty much I'll stick around for as long as they need me to, but it really depends on what the office staff has done in that office and whether or not, they want to continue with me in certain areas like bookkeeping or anything like that, right? Or if they need me for credential, they need me for bookkeeping, they need me for payroll, they need me, for different things. So, I have different relationships with all of my doctors. Some doctors will stay with the same, payroll company or whatever. So, yeah, so it's all different as far as what we do afterwards. I stick around for as long as they want me to stick around for, but yeah.
I mean, one thing I love about Kathy and your experience, I mean, you are truly the plug to the lenders. Like you are, going to bring, them, you've been with them, you've either worked with them or for them. And so you're able to really say, like we were talking about this earlier, kind of offline, you're able to kind of say, here's the options, right? That I think might be before, doctor and talk them through what that looks like. Again, everyone's focused on rate, who's got the lowest rate, who's got the lowest rate. But sometimes it sounds like there's more to it than that. Oftentimes they all want to focus on the rate, but you're able to kind of help them probably think about it a little deeper.
Yeah. So I have what I call my 60-second quiz, right? And literally it should take you about 60 seconds to go through it. And what the 60-second quiz is a series of bank questions that you should be able to answer within 60 seconds. What's most important to you? Prepayment penalty, advance payments, interest rate. Do you have 10% to put down? Are you buying the commercial real estate under a different entity? Do you know the difference between a prepayment penalty and advance payments? Right? Different things like that. That I know, okay, we're going to spend the next half an hour, Justin, you and I, we're going to discuss what you put on here, because they really need to know, what they're asking for, right? So some doctors will be, completely interest rate driven. And other doctors are like, well, no, I'd rather have the flexibility that if I want to pay off my loan or that I want a brick and mortar. I mean, we see new banks coming up every day on the internet, but are you that kind of person that wants to use a brick and mortar and, bank, do you want to go down and, hand them your checks every day? I myself prefer that you scan them, and then, the cash you bring down to the bank or whatever. But that's up to them, what they're most comfortable with. So. But there's all these decisions that you need to make when you're going through an acquisition or even a startup. I mean, I know we didn't talk too much about startups, but, I do have lecture series on startups in person if anybody's around here in the New England region that wants to do a startup. That it's an in-depth program that we run here in the Northeast. So.
Yeah, and startup world gets really into the weeds or can get into the weeds on the lease, right? We didn't even really touch too much on that and dealing with our landlord friends out there. And it can be tricky. I mean, transactions lately, whether it's really acquisition or startup, a lot has turned on the lease and, understanding what is this lease fair for the market. We've got landlords who are like, sure, I'll assign it to you and let's keep going forward. And we got others that are like, well, guess what? You want to do this deal? The rent just doubled. And we went through that ourselves when we had our old group. And I was like, how can you do that? But, there's the ability, the opportunity, we should say, for some of the landlords to maybe change the terms a bit where, again, they do need somebody advocating for them to understand what's even in this lease.
Yeah, it's interesting. The lease, and the landlord play a huge role in this, right? In the transition or a startup of a dental office, because you just can't pack your stuff up and leave, and go to the next new space. It takes a year to do that, right? To relocate your office. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been through probably 1,500 transitions in my lifetime. And, I can distinctively remember one where the broker wanted to wait 2 weeks before to go to the landlord to say, we have a new buyer. Dr. Seller is selling. Dr. Buyer is buying. We're in a 2-week time period. Before the close, here's the lease. Lease is completely done. This is what we're offering. The whole thing, package ready to go, everything. And the landlord said, oh, that's great. We're going to put up a CBS and, that's great. So now we don't have to worry about it anymore. I mean, and that was it. Dr. Seller's world crashed. Dr. Buyer's world crashed. I mean, it would take 6 months for us to get into a new space, build out the walls, get the equipment in there, right? A minimum of 6 months. What are you going to do with the patients, right? During this time, right? So it creates quite a bit of problems. And some people are like, well, we want to wait until the last person to know is going to be the landlord because we don't want the landlord getting all upset and feeling like they have to make all these decisions, that they have time to make the decision so that they extend out the time. So yeah, so there's all different tactics, but I do think that the lease is probably the worst.
Yeah. I would agree. Working on them all the time is yeah, sometimes the bane of our existence, but we have to do it to get the deal done. And on the point of, you actually made me think of kind of notifying people, right? The staff transition, you touched on a little bit before, but that's a very delicate area, right? So I'm interested to get your insight on it. And I know it's kind of a tangent, but like, we've had deals where it was like day of closing, we're gonna march in there and you say, guess what? I sold the practice and here's a new owners, but they're great, so no one freak out. And we've had other times where, unfortunately, which is what sellers want to avoid, they told them too early, deal didn't happen. And now the staff spooked, like, do I need to look for a job? He's going to sell. So where do you like, is it just a situational thing, or how do you like guide the buyers and really the sellers, everybody, like on when should we tell folks about the transition?
I think you kind of have to be far enough along in the legal process, right? So, you have to be pretty much through all of your red lines on the asset purchase agreement, right? To be able to have that discussion. Yes, I have seen where the sellers notify the staff because I felt that, like, hey, look, I'm going to retire. So I just wanted to be the first to know you. Or that, I'm going to call everybody on the weekend and tell them all individually because they've been with me for so long. Those are just things you should never do, right? So I think that you have to have a plan in place. And so, you need to discuss it with you first as far as how far along are you in the asset, right? You have an approval, there's money up front, nobody's backing out of the deal, right? Then, okay. Then what happens is I feel it's really important the way you introduce somebody, right? So the way I like to do it is you introduce somebody and you say, you know what? You go to the office manager and you have the discussion with the office manager. Okay, office manager, I need you to, clean the schedule on Wednesday, right? Wednesday afternoon, and tell everybody we're going to lunch. Okay. And then you go out, right? You all go to lunch. You're going to go to this fancy place and you go to lunch and this person is sitting there, right? And you say, and the doctor says, well, I invited Dr. So-and-so to come into the office for lunch with us because I wanted you to meet her, right? And, I tell the seller that this is more about the buyer than it is about you, right? So, I explain to the buyer, that they should be introducing themselves and saying who they are, right? Who they are, how long they've been around for, what's their skills, what do they like to do personally, give them a little bit of personal information. I just had a baby, I just that, whatever it is, right? Because the very second that he says that he's going to retire, that second, in a nanosecond, right? The staff thinks just like this. Oh my God, he's selling the office. They're going to go have somebody else. I need to get a job. I have to go online right away. I have to find another job and I'm going to go bankrupt because, I don't have a job anymore. Right. And in a nanosecond, all that happens. So, you have to make sure that you have a script that says, look, everything stays in place. You're not losing anything. Nobody's going anywhere. Everything's going to be good, and then their God comes down and they're like, okay, I don't have to worry about going bankrupt anymore, and taking my kid out of private school. We're good. Right. And, but it's like all these things that happen so quickly, that, you want to have them in a place that they can't run away. Right. Or they can't just jump up and go somewhere. Right. Because you're outside the area, you're outside the dental office, and so it wouldn't be appropriate for you to get up and leave. And then by the end of that lunch meeting, right, you should have been able to make a connection with each one of those people so that you can say, hey, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Right. And there you go.
Love it. I'm telling you, Kathy, you got to write a book on like Kathy's 100 or 1,000 top, practice buying. You always have the greatest insight whenever I talk to you. I write down one-liners. I'm mad I didn't bring any with me, but truly, you've seen it all. You know how to do the transition. It's awesome. My last question probably for you is, do you see? I mean, I'm obsessed with AI, I don't know if I'm scared or interested or what, and maybe a little bit of all of it. We talked to Ali Hyatt, who is a COO at Henry Schein One, and about all the tools that are rolling out, but it's still scary, right? Like people are like, oh, am I going to have a job? Am I not? Legal field is getting majorly hit right now by AI because everyone creates their own APAs on ChatGPT, and fortunately they still come to us to bless it, and we're like, okay, we have to start over. But from your standpoint, are there things buyers should be looking at, like in some of these tools, or is it just depend on the buyer, depend on the practice, or you're not even there yet, kind of in the exploration phase?
Well, each one of our deals is different. And that's what you just said when you said you had to rewrite it, right? Or you have to reshape whatever they came out with, right? So they wrote their own asset purchase agreement. ChatGPT wrote it for them. And they said, I've just saved all this money in legal fees because here is here's the draft APA. And you look at it, you're like, what? This isn't anything like what this deal looks like. The same feeling with me, right? Is that, AI is great. I love AI. I think it's cool. I think it's great. Like, this is the best thing ever. But each one of our transactions are unique. They're very unique. Okay. And because you're dealing with people's personalities, and AI hasn't got there yet. And, it is, you look at each deal, and while, there's lots of things that I rely on with AI, there's also things like I tell, my staff, you have to know whether or not AI is right. Okay. And that's what makes you the expert.
Yeah.
And so, there are some things I think are really cool. You can put something in there and it's like, wow, look at this spreadsheet. This is like the best thing ever. And then there are other things that like I would look at and be like, like, what is this? What is this? It doesn't make any sense. But and I remember from way back in the accounting days, you had to know if the system was right or wrong. You still have to know. AI still has not beaten us yet.
Right. Love it. I mean, I could get whenever it comes out, I want maybe an opportunity to write the forward, but Kathy's 100 or 1,000 tips, because seriously, you've been a blessing to our clients and, helped our firm, and we continue to learn. So, I would love to let people know where they can find you, how should they track you down? You're speaking, you're at the shows or the events, but you're also retired, quote unquote. So where and how should folks find you?
Retired from lending. I'm retired from lending. I'm not back to lending. Not ever.
All right. You heard it here first.
All lenders, but I'm not doing that. Anyway, okay. So really the best way is check out my website, which is www. And it's long, but it's easy. nextstepdentalconsulting.com, right? Nice and easy. nextstepdentalconsulting.com. But you'll find on the website that there's a lot of tips. There's a lot of information on the website. You can contact me there. You can always call me, 508-864-2113. You can always send me an email, Kathy@nextstepdentalconsulting.com. And by the way, I did try to shorten it, but I couldn't. So that's part of the marketing thing, right? That's part of the marketing piece. To do the marketing. So anyway, love to talk to anybody that has any questions. More than accessible. People can call me and ask me anything. So.
Amazing. And we'll put all of that in our show notes, here on the podcast so that people can track Kathy down. Again, for all our residents, our graduates, folks who are already thinking about this stuff, but maybe it's 5 years down the road, I highly suggest at least a conversation with Kathy to start thinking about, what that process looks like, because it is overwhelming. And I think folks get spooked out of it. So Kathy, thank you. I've kept you here for a while, so I'll let you go enjoy your Friday, but thank you again for sharing some knowledge.
Thank you very much, Justin, for having me. Look forward to talking with you real soon.
Likewise.
Bye.